There comes a time in every generation when silence becomes betrayal, when comfort becomes complicity, and when leadership must rise not from pride, not from power, but from love. True leadership is not forged in the halls of privilege. It is born in the hearts of those who dare to resist injustice with courage and compassion. Today, we gather to remember that the greatest force for change the world has ever known is not hatred. It is love disciplined by resistance. Leadership rooted in love begins with the recognition that every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth. As taught and embodied by Martin Luther King, Jr., love is not sentimental affection nor passive kindness, but a powerful and disciplined force for transformation. It is the deliberate choice to seek the well-being of others, even in the face of hostility or misunderstanding. This kind of love, often described as agape, is unconditional and redemptive. It does not depend on agreement, approval, or reciprocity. Instead, it flows from a deep moral conviction that humanity is interconnected and that the fate of one is tied to the fate of all. When love becomes the foundation of leadership, authority shifts from domination to service. A leader guided by love does not seek power for personal gain, but accepts responsibility for the upliftment of others. Such leadership listens before it commands, understands before it judges, and heals before it punishes. It recognizes that people are more than their mistakes, more than their anger, and more than the labels society assigns to them. In environments marked by division and inequality, love-centered leadership creates space for dialogue, reconciliation, and growth. It transforms conflict from a battlefield into a bridge. Love in leadership also demands courage. It is easier to respond to hatred with hatred, to injustice with bitterness, and to oppression with revenge. Yet love calls the leader to a higher standard. It insists on resisting injustice without dehumanizing those who perpetuate it. This approach does not ignore wrongdoing or excuse harm. Rather, it confronts injustice firmly while refusing to surrender to the corrosive power of resentment. Love strengthens the moral resolve of a leader, enabling them to stand against systems of oppression while maintaining compassion for individuals trapped within those systems. Furthermore, leadership grounded in love fosters unity without erasing differences. It acknowledges diversity of experience, culture, and perspective while affirming shared humanity. Love-centered leaders build communities where people feel seen, heard, and valued. They cultivate trust by acting consistently with integrity and empathy. In moments of crisis, their compassion becomes a stabilizing force, reminding others that even in turmoil, dignity must not be abandoned. Their influence grows not through fear, but through inspiration, not through coercion, but through moral example. Love also nurtures resilience. Leaders who act from love are sustained by a purpose greater than personal ambition. Their commitment to justice and human flourishing fuels perseverance when progress seems slow or resistance intensifies. Because their motivation is rooted in care for others, setbacks do not easily extinguish their determination. Instead, adversity deepens their resolve and clarifies their mission. Love becomes both the compass that guides their decisions and the strength that carries them through hardship, shaping a leadership that transforms communities, challenges injustice, and awakens the conscience of society. Resistance without hatred is a moral discipline that demands both strength and restraint. It is the courageous decision to confront injustice while refusing to allow anger to harden into bitterness. As demonstrated by Martin Luther King, Jr., true resistance does not seek to humiliate or destroy an opponent, but to expose injustice and awaken conscience. It recognizes that systems may be corrupt and actions may be cruel, yet it refuses to reduce any human being to the sum of their wrongdoing. This form of resistance is not passive acceptance. It is active, organized, and unyielding opposition to oppression, carried out with moral clarity and self-control. Hatred is often the easiest response to injustice. When communities experience discrimination, violence, or exclusion, resentment can feel justified and even empowering. Yet hatred carries a hidden cost. It corrodes the spirit of those who hold it and narrows the vision of movements seeking change. Resistance without hatred rejects this destructive cycle. It channels anger into disciplined action rather than uncontrolled retaliation. It transforms emotional energy into strategic protest, advocacy, and collective organization. In doing so, it preserves the moral high ground and prevents the oppressed from mirroring the very behavior they seek to overcome. Nonviolent resistance stands at the heart of this principle. It refuses to cooperate with injustice while declining to inflict harm in return. Boycotts, marches, sit-ins, and civil disobedience become tools not of revenge, but of revelation. These actions dramatize injustice so that it can no longer remain hidden or ignored. They create tension, not to provoke chaos, but to force society to confront uncomfortable truths. Through disciplined nonviolence, resistance without hatred exposes the moral contradictions within unjust systems and invites transformation rather than annihilation. Such resistance requires immense courage. It is far more difficult to endure insult without retaliation, to face violence without striking back, and to persist in dignity while being denied it. This courage is not weakness, it is strength under control. It is the power to choose principle over impulse. By refusing hatred, the resistor maintains inner freedom even when external freedoms are restricted. Their dignity becomes untouchable because it is anchored in values rather than circumstances. Resistance without hatred also seeks redemption. It believes that change is possible not only for laws and institutions, but for hearts and minds. By refusing to dehumanize opponents, it leaves space for repentance and reconciliation. It challenges injustice while affirming shared humanity. This approach does not guarantee immediate victory, nor does it eliminate suffering. It does, however, ensure that the struggle for justice does not become morally compromised by the methods used to achieve it. Through disciplined action, moral clarity, and unwavering commitment to human dignity, resistance without hatred transforms struggle into a force that confronts injustice while preserving the humanity of all involved. Courage to stand alone is one of the defining qualities of transformative leadership. It is the strength to remain firm in conviction when approval fades, when allies withdraw, and when the cost of truth becomes personal. As exemplified by Martin Luther King Jr., this courage does not arise from stubbornness or pride, but from a deep commitment to moral principle. It is the quiet but unshakable resolve that says, what is right must be upheld, even if it is unpopular, misunderstood, or resisted. Standing alone often means walking into uncertainty, carrying a vision that others may not yet see, and trusting that justice does not depend on majority support. To stand alone requires clarity of conscience. A leader must know what they believe and why they believe it. Without this inner foundation, external pressure can easily bend conviction into compromise. Public opinion shifts like the wind, and social acceptance can be withdrawn in an instant. Courage anchors leadership beyond applause or criticism. It draws strength from values rather than validation. When a leader speaks against injustice, they may face ridicule, threats, or isolation. Yet the courageous leader understands that silence in the face of wrongdoing is a far heavier burden than loneliness. This kind of courage is rarely dramatic in appearance. It may be expressed in a solitary decision to refuse participation in discrimination, in a firm yet calm speech delivered to a hostile audience, or in the steadfast continuation of a movement when progress seems slow. The leader who stands alone must often endure doubt, both from others and from within. Fear is natural, and uncertainty is inevitable. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. It transforms vulnerability into strength by aligning action with conscience. Standing alone also means accepting sacrifice. History shows that those who challenge injustice frequently pay a personal price. Careers may be threatened, reputations questioned, and safety endangered. The courageous leader does not seek suffering, yet they are willing to bear discomfort for the sake of truth. This willingness communicates authenticity and inspires others to reconsider their own silence. Over time, what begins as a solitary stance can become a shared movement, as conviction proves stronger than conformity. Moreover, courage to stand alone strengthens the moral fabric of society. It disrupts complacency and challenges the comfort of the status quo. When one person refuses to yield to injustice, they create space for others to find their own voice. Their example demonstrates that integrity is possible even under pressure. In moments when compromise appears easier than conviction, the solitary stand becomes a beacon of moral clarity. Through resilience, conscience, and unwavering dedication to principle, courage to stand alone shapes leaders who remain faithful to justice even when the path is narrow and the crowd is absent. Justice as love in action expresses the conviction that love is not merely a feeling, but a force that reshapes social reality. In the vision articulated by Martin Luther King Jr., love that remains private and passive fails to reach its highest purpose. Genuine love seeks to correct what harms human dignity. It refuses to remain silent when inequality degrades communities or when systems deny people their basic rights. Justice becomes the outward movement of love, transforming compassion from sentiment into structure and principle into policy. Love recognizes the sacred worth of every person, and justice defends that worth in public life. When laws marginalize, when opportunities are restricted, or when voices are suppressed, love demands more than sympathy. It calls for reform, advocacy, and courageous engagement. Justice ensures that love is not confined to personal relationships, but extends into institutions, workplaces, schools, and governments. It insists that fairness and equality are not optional ideals, but moral necessities rooted in shared humanity. Justice as love in action also clarifies that accountability is not the opposite of compassion. To confront injustice is not to abandon love, but to fulfill it. Love that ignores exploitation becomes indulgence, and love that tolerates discrimination becomes complicity. Justice challenges wrongdoing not to punish for punishment's sake, but to restore balance and protect the vulnerable. It seeks transformation rather than revenge. Through fair laws, equitable systems, and inclusive practices, justice repairs what hatred or neglect has broken. This understanding requires leaders and communities to move beyond comfort. It is easier to express goodwill in words than to examine policies that advantage some while disadvantaging others. Justice asks difficult questions about power, privilege, and responsibility. It invites societies to align their actions with their professed values. When love informs this process, reform is pursued not with hostility, but with determination and clarity. The goal is not to defeat opponents, but to build a social order where dignity is safeguarded for all. Justice as love in action also fosters solidarity. It recognizes that injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere, binding individuals into a shared moral community. When one group suffers exclusion or oppression, love calls others to stand beside them. This solidarity strengthens collective resolve and expands empathy beyond familiar boundaries. Justice transforms isolated concern into coordinated effort, shaping movements that challenge discrimination and expand opportunity. Moreover, justice grounded in love sustains hope. It affirms that change is possible because human beings are capable of growth and institutions are capable of reform. Even when resistance emerges, love-driven justice perseveres with patience and discipline. It measures success not only by legal victories, but by the gradual awakening of conscience and the strengthening of community bonds. Through courageous advocacy, principled reform, and unwavering respect for human dignity, justice as love in action embodies the moral energy that reshapes societies and aligns public life with the deeper truth of shared humanity. The power of moral vision lies in its ability to see beyond the present moment and imagine a future shaped by justice, dignity, and shared humanity. As powerfully expressed in the life and leadership of Martin Luther King Jr., moral vision is not fantasy or wishful thinking. It is a disciplined and courageous perception of what ought to be, even when reality reflects what is broken. It refuses to accept injustice as permanent or inequality as inevitable. Instead, it holds before society a picture of transformation that challenges complacency and awakens hope. Moral vision begins with conviction. A leader guided by it understands that progress requires more than reacting to crises. It demands a clear and compelling image of a better future. Without vision, movements lose direction and efforts fragment into isolated acts. Vision gathers scattered frustrations into purposeful momentum. It gives people language to articulate their longing for change and symbols to rally around. When individuals can see the possibility of a different tomorrow, they find the strength to endure the struggles of today. This kind of vision also reshapes perspective. It trains leaders and communities to evaluate decisions not only by immediate gain, but by long-term impact. Policies, practices, and behaviors are measured against enduring moral principles rather than temporary convenience. Moral vision asks whether actions align with fairness, compassion, and equality. It challenges systems that perpetuate harm and inspires alternatives that promote inclusion. Through this lens, leadership becomes less about managing the present and more about cultivating a future rooted in ethical integrity. The power of moral vision is especially evident in times of adversity. When opposition intensifies and setbacks accumulate, vision sustains perseverance. It reminds people that change rarely unfolds quickly or smoothly. Vision provides meaning to sacrifice and context to suffering. It frames struggle not as futile resistance, but as necessary labor toward a just society. In this way, moral vision transforms discouragement into determination and despair into disciplined hope. Moreover, moral vision has the capacity to unite diverse communities. It speaks to universal aspirations for respect and opportunity. By appealing to shared values rather than narrow interests, it builds coalitions across differences of background and belief. A leader with moral vision does not merely critique injustice, but offers a constructive alternative. They describe a society where children are valued, where work is honored, and where rights are protected. This positive framing invites participation and fosters collective responsibility. Moral vision also shapes character. Leaders who hold such vision must cultivate integrity, empathy, and courage. Their credibility depends on living in alignment with the future they proclaim. Vision without integrity becomes rhetoric, but vision grounded in moral consistency inspires trust. It calls individuals to elevate their conduct and align their choices with principles larger than personal comfort. Through conviction, perseverance, and an unwavering commitment to ethical purpose, the power of moral vision guides leadership beyond the limits of the present and illuminates a path toward a more just and compassionate society. The responsibility of every generation lies in its response to the moral challenges of its time. No era is free from injustice, conflict, or inequality, and no generation is excused from confronting them. As emphasized through the leadership and witness of Martin Luther King Jr., history is not shaped only by extraordinary individuals, but by ordinary people who decide whether they will remain silent or become engaged. Each generation inherits both the progress and the problems of the past. What it chooses to protect, challenge, or transform determines the direction of the future. Every generation stands at a crossroads between complacency and courage. Comfort can persuade people to accept unfair systems as normal, especially when those systems do not immediately harm them. Yet responsibility demands awareness. It calls individuals to examine the conditions around them and ask whether dignity is being upheld for all. When rights are denied or voices are suppressed, neutrality becomes participation in the status quo. Responsibility requires the willingness to question, to learn, and to act in alignment with moral principles rather than convenience. This responsibility is not limited to public leaders or activists. It belongs to students, workers, parents, and professionals alike. Social change often begins in everyday decisions: how one treats others, how one speaks against discrimination, how one participates in civic life. Voting, organizing, educating, mentoring, and advocating are expressions of generational accountability. Even small acts of integrity contribute to a broader culture of justice. When individuals recognize their collective power, isolated efforts grow into movements that reshape communities. The responsibility of every generation also includes preserving hard-won freedoms. Rights secured through sacrifice can erode if taken for granted. Historical gains in equality, labor protections, and civil liberties require continual vigilance. Responsibility means studying the struggles that achieved these victories and honoring them through sustained commitment. It involves resisting attempts to reverse progress and ensuring that institutions remain accountable to the principles they claim to uphold. At the same time, each generation must address new forms of injustice that emerge in changing social and technological landscapes. Economic disparities, environmental concerns, and evolving cultural tensions demand thoughtful engagement. Responsibility requires adaptability without abandoning core values. It challenges people to apply timeless principles of fairness and compassion to contemporary realities. Through innovation guided by ethics, generations contribute fresh solutions while remaining anchored in moral continuity. Intergenerational solidarity further strengthens this responsibility. Wisdom from the past and energy from the present combine to shape a hopeful future. Younger voices bring creativity and urgency, while elders offer experience and perspective. When generations listen to one another, they avoid repeating mistakes and build upon shared aspirations. Responsibility becomes a collaborative effort rather than a solitary burden. Through awareness, courage, preservation of progress, and active engagement with emerging challenges, the responsibility of every generation shapes whether society advances toward greater justice or retreats into indifference. Leadership rooted in love and resistance calls each of us to rise above fear, above hatred, and above indifference. It reminds us that love is not weakness, that resistance is not rebellion for its own sake, and that courage is not reserved for the extraordinary. The legacy of leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. teaches us that true greatness is measured not by power held, but by dignity defended and lives uplifted. When love becomes our foundation, justice becomes our mission. When resistance is guided by compassion, change becomes transformative rather than destructive. When we dare to stand alone for what is right, we inspire others to stand with us. When moral vision directs our steps, the future opens before us with possibility. And when every generation accepts its responsibility, history bends not by chance, but by choice. Let us lead with hearts strong enough to love in the face of hatred, spirits bold enough to resist in the face of injustice, and faith deep enough to believe that a better world is not only possible but necessary,